The summer sun beat down hard on Laramie, Wyoming. The streets stank of horse sweat, stale whiskey, and the dust that never seemed to settle. For most folks, Laramie was a stopover, a place to gamble, drink, and strike a bargain in the back room of a saloon. For Leah Hensley, it was a prison. Her mother was long dead, leaving her with a father and brother who valued whiskey and cards more than kin. Her father, Jonas, was a hard man with a crooked smile that never reached his eyes. Her brother, Tom, was smaller, but quicker to sneer, always eager to remind Leah she was nothing but a weight on the wagon. She cooked, she scrubbed, she mended their clothes until her fingers bled. But no matter how hard she worked, they told her the same thing. You're worth nothing. She'd heard it so often, it began to ring in her skull like a hammer on iron. That day, her father's luck had soured again. He'd lost big at the Brass Lantern Saloon. The pot was stacked against him, and the men at the table wanted their due. Jonas, desperate, cast his eyes toward his daughter. Got something better than coin, he said, spitting into the sawdust. Got a girl, strong back, she'll fetch her keep. Leah froze where she stood, clutching a tray of mugs. Her heart pounded so hard she thought the men must hear it. Tom smirked. She's 24 and still unwed, too proud, too sharp-tongued, but she can work like a mule if you don't mind the mouth. Laughter rolled around the table. The dealer, a red-faced railroad foreman named Miles Rankin, licked his lips. His eyes crawled over Leah as though she were livestock. I'll take her, Rankin said, tossing a handful of coins on the table. More than she's worth. A girl like that belongs in a tent outside the camps, warming beds and hauling water. The room erupted with jeers. Leah stood rigid, her knuckles white. She would not give them the pleasure of seeing her break. But inside, shame and fury twisted together. She looked at her father and saw only relief in his eyes. Just then, the saloon doors creaked open. Silence cut through the room. A tall man stepped inside. He wore a buckskin shirt, worn from years in the weather. A Bowie knife rode at his hip. His skin was bronze from the high plains sun, his black hair tied at the nape. It was Gus, an Apache hunter who came down from the hills to trade. He was young, maybe 27, but his eyes seemed older than stone. He walked to the table where Rankin's coins still gleamed. "What do you want, Injun?" Jonas snarled. Gus didn't answer right away. He slid a heavy satchel from his shoulder. From it he drew a folded pelt, broad, soft, the hide of a winter buffalo, worth more than all of Rankin's silver combined. He laid it flat on the table. "If she is no use to you," Gus said, his voice low and measured, "then I will take her." The room stilled. Rankin barked a laugh. "Trade a buffalo skin for that. You can have her, Hunter." "She's yours then," Jonas grunted. "One less mouth to feed." But Gus wasn't looking at them. His gaze was fixed on Leah. He saw the fury burning behind her eyes. He saw the way she held herself straight, not pleading, not begging, defiant. "You can walk away," Gus said softly to her. "Or you can come with me. Your choice." The word struck her harder than any slap. Choice. No man had ever offered her that. The crowd waited, hungry for drama. Leah's heart thundered. She set the tray down, wiped her trembling hand on her skirt, and lifted her chin. "I'll go," she said. Her voice did not shake. Rankin swore. Jonas sputtered, but no one stopped her as she walked past them, past the coins, past her father's scorn. Gus held the saloon doors open for her. Together, they stepped out into the blinding sun. Leah did not look back. She would not give them the sight of her tears. She only saw the wide horizon, the trail cutting west, and the man beside her who had given her, for the first time in her life, the right to decide. They reached his horse, a sturdy bay with a scar along its flank. Gus swung up with an easy grace, then offered his hand. Leah hesitated only a moment before placing her palm in his and climbing up behind him. The trail wound north and west, a ribbon of dust that stretched toward the dark ridges of the Medicine Bow Mountains. Laya sat astride behind Gus, her hands uncertain on the saddle. He did not speak. At first, the silence gnawed at her. Why had he done this? What did he expect? What kind of man trades a buffalo hide for a woman? Finally, when the heat pressed too heavy, she dared whisper, "Why?" For a long while, she thought he hadn't heard. Then, without turning, Gus said, "Because you looked like you wanted out." Her chest tightened. She hadn't expected such a plain truth. By late afternoon, Gus drew the horse to a halt near a shallow creek. He swung down, then offered his hand. She took it, sliding to the ground, her legs trembling. Gus knelt, filled a tin cup, and handed it to her. She drank, the water cold and sharp on her tongue. When she lowered the cup, he was refilling it for himself. He hadn't drunk first. He'd made sure she had her fill before him. That small courtesy stung her eyes more than the dust ever had. As dusk settled, they made camp near a stand of aspens. Gus gathered fallen branches, and Laya stood uncertain, not knowing what to do with her hands. "Here," he said, showing her how to stack the wood. His voice was low, unhurried, not commanding. She mimicked his motions, awkward at first, until the fire caught. When the flames settled, Gus laid his bedroll a short distance away. He set a second blanket near the fire. "Yours." Laya blinked. He wasn't going to. He shook his head, lowering himself onto his own blanket. "Rest. Long trail tomorrow." She had braced for demands, for rough hands and worse words. Instead, she was left with nothing but the crackle of the fire and the sound of night insects singing in the grass. This man had traded something of great worth for her, yet he treated her as if she belonged only to herself. It was a thought she held tight, like a fragile ember. The next day, they reached a clearing beside a stream that tumbled over rocks. Gus stopped, scanning the space. "This will be home," he said. Laya's breath caught. "Home?" He unloaded the horse, setting down tools, a hatchet, bundles of rope. Then he looked at her. "Cabin here. Not yet. Will take time." She wrapped her arms around herself, uncertain. "And what do you want me to do?" Gus's eyes met hers across the clearing. "Choose, stay, leave, no chains." Her throat tightened. For the first time, the decision was in her hands. She looked at the stream glinting in the sunlight, the ring of trees standing like sentinels, the mountains rising beyond. Her chest ached, not with fear, but with possibility. "I'll stay," she whispered. Gus gave a short nod, as if he had expected nothing less. He handed her the hatchet. "Then we build." The work was brutal. Laya swung the axe until her palms blistered and bled. Gus worked beside her, showing without scorn, steady and patient. They dragged logs, shaping them into rough walls. Laya hauled stones from the creek, stacking them for a hearth. Her muscles screamed, but each strike felt like carving her name into the land. One afternoon, when her hands were raw, Gus paused beside her. He handed her a small tin of bear fat. "For the blisters," he said. "You knew they hurt?" He nodded. "Can see it in the way you carry the axe." Her father had mocked weakness. Her brother had scorned her struggles. But here was a man who noticed her pain without ridicule. She rubbed the fat into her palms, blinking away tears she refused to let fall. By the second week, the cabin's shape stood tall, rough and unfinished. But it was more than she had ever dreamed. She planted wildflowers near the steps, digging into the soil with her bare hands. That evening, Gus pulled a flat board from his pack. He sat by the fire, charcoal in hand, and began to draw letters. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Your name," he said simply. Her breath caught as she watched him write. Laya. The letters were dark and steady. He turned the board to face her. "This is you." Her eyes burned. Her father had always told her that books and letters were a waste on women. She had lived her life half illiterate, ashamed of the ignorance forced on her. Now, in the firelight, a man had given her back what had been denied. "I don't know how to," she began, but Gus pressed the charcoal into her hand. "Try." Her fingers trembled. She copied the shapes, clumsy and uneven. But when she finished, the marks spelled her name. She stared at it, then clutched the board to her chest as if it were gold. "It's mine," she whispered. Gus gave a single nod. "Always was?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible, wasn't a burden, wasn't a mouth to be bartered away. She was a person with a name, written, seen, remembered. The days rolled on. She learned to set snares, to strip bark, to listen for deer in the underbrush. Gus taught her without lectures, showing with his hands, letting her try and fail and try again. One evening, she sat by the fire, rubbing her sore shoulders. "You lost someone," she said softly. He paused, his knife still. "My wife," he said at last, "and our boy. Fever. 2 winters ago." The silence that followed was heavy. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Gus slid the knife back into its sheath. His eyes finally met hers, dark and unreadable. "The land takes. The land gives. Still here." She understood then why he carried himself like stone. Too much had already been taken. And yet he had chosen to give her freedom, to build with her instead of breaking her. It humbled her more than any kindness she had ever known. That night, Laya sat awake long after Gus had gone to his bedroll. She traced the letters of her name on the board over and over. The fire crackled low. The stars wheeled overhead. And for the first time in all her years, she felt not like property, but like someone who belonged to herself. The first hint of trouble came not in shouts, but in the silence of the forest. The birds went quiet one afternoon. Gus, splitting kindling, paused mid-swing. He lifted his head, eyes narrowing toward the ridge. "Riders," he said, his voice flat. Laya rose from the garden, her heart turning to ice. She saw them. 2 figures on horseback, making their way down the slope with the slow arrogance of men who believed the land belonged to them. It was her father and brother. They rode into the clearing. Jonas, her father, scanned the cabin with disdain. "Well, well, didn't think you'd crawl up a mountain just to play house in a shack." Tom spat into the dirt. "Told you she wouldn't last, Pa. Looks like she's been hauling wood like a mule." Gus stepped down from the porch, axe in hand, the blade resting low. He said nothing, only met their eyes with unblinking calm. "We're here for her," Jonas sniffed. "You're not welcome," Gus replied, his voice steady as stone. "She's my blood," Jonas barked. "My daughter. You think you can just keep her?" "She's not mine," Gus said. "She's herself." Tom swung off his horse. "Don't play noble, Injun. She's a debt. We fed her all these years. Now there's a rancher in Cheyenne offering 10 head of cattle for a wife. We've come to collect what's ours." Rage, sharper than fear, surged in Laya's chest. Before Gus could answer, she stepped forward. Her chin was high. Her voice rang clear in the air. "I'm not going with you." Jonas blinked. "What?" "I said no," she repeated, louder this time. "I'm not for sale. Not anymore." Tom snorted, stepping closer, but Gus shifted, the axe glinting. Tom stopped short. "You ungrateful," Jonas began. Laya cut him off. "You didn't raise me. You tolerated me until you could profit. You called me worthless. But I've built something here with my own hands, with my own choice. I will never go back to being a coin in your pocket." The clearing held its breath. Jonas's face twisted with fury. He looked around and for the first time noticed shadows at the edge of the trees. A pair of trappers stood watching, rifles slung over their shoulders. A homesteader's wife lingered with her children. Word had spread of Gus and the woman who had chosen to live free. The eyes of the valley were upon him, his bravado cracked. "You'll regret this, girl," he spat. "Maybe," Laya answered, her voice unshaken. But it'll be my regret, not yours. Jonas swung onto his horse, his movements sharp with anger. Tom glared at Gus one last time before following. They vanished back into the trees, their curses trailing behind them. Only when they were gone did Laya let out her breath. Her knees trembled, but she did not fall. She had spoken. She had chosen. Gus set the axe down. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't need to. His silence was acknowledgement. He had let her stand for herself. That night, she sat on the steps, wrapped in Gus's coat. I thought I'd crumble, she admitted softly. All my life, I never had words when he shouted. But tonight they came. Gus sat on the ground nearby, carving a piece of wood. Mountain heard you, he said. So did they. Words like that don't die easy. The first snows came early that year. The cold was a living thing, an enemy that prowled every shadow. Game grew scarce. Gus ranged farther, returning with less each time. Then one bitter evening, Laya heard the panicked bray of their mule. She rushed to the door and saw Gus staggering up the trail, blood soaking his shirt. Elk, he grunted, clutching his side. Antler caught me. The wound was no graze. It was a deep, bleeding tear. She half dragged him inside. For days, he could hardly rise. The man who had felled trees now struggled to stand. So Laya became the strength. She split wood until her palms blistered anew. She hauled buckets of ice-crusted water. She set snares, stumbling through snowdrifts. When the traps were empty, she scraped together dried beans and jerky. At night, she sat by his side, whispering the letters of her name, the name he had taught her. He would watch her, fever bright in his eyes. One night, as the wind howled, he murmured, "You're stronger than this mountain." She blinked, startled. Stronger? I can barely keep us fed. He shook his head, his voice rough. I've seen storms split trees in half, Laya. Seen rivers carve stone. But you don't break. Tears spilled down her cheeks. No one had ever called her strong. All her life she'd been told she was nothing. Gus reached out, his hand covering hers. Storm passes, he whispered. You'll still be standing. And he was right. Slowly, he healed. By February, he could walk outside again, leaning heavy but upright. One evening, Laya brought in the day's last armful of logs and sank to the floor, exhausted. Gus lowered himself into the chair beside her. You've kept us alive, he said simply. She shook her head. I only did what had to be done. That is strength, he said, his eyes unwavering. Not muscle, not fury, just doing what must be done. She knew then. She was no longer living in the shadow of men who measured her worth in debts and wages. Here in the heart of winter, she had measured herself and found she was enough. Spring came, and with it, new life. And visitors. 3 riders came up the trail, freighters out of Cheyenne. Their leader, a man named Lyle, tipped his hat. Heard tell there's a woman up here who can read figures and keep a ledger, he said. Got a mining claim south of town. Prospectors running ore, but none of us can keep the books straight. Pays fair. A roof over your head. First woman in Cheyenne hired for her brains, not her looks. Interested? The words hit her like a stone in a still pond. A real job. A life in town where she could stand equal. Gus said nothing. His eyes flicked once to her, unreadable. We'll think on it, he told Lyle. That night, the offer burned in her chest. Why didn't you say anything? She asked Gus. He set down the piece of wood he was carving. Not my choice, yours. And if I go? Gus reached into his pack and drew out a small, hand-carved map. This will take you down the easiest trail, and if you don't go, keep it anyway, so you'll always know the way back. Her breath caught. You're not going to stop me. Tell me to stay? His dark eyes softened. You're not mine to keep, Laya. That's the point. 2 mornings later, the freighters returned. Well, miss? Lyle asked, smiling. You ready? Laya stood at the trail, the carved map in her hand. Her heart thundered. She thought of Cheyenne, of books and ledgers, of a life where no one sneered her into silence. Then she looked back at the cabin, at the garden sprouting green, at Gus standing on the porch with sawdust on his shirt and patience in his face. She shook her head. No. Lyle frowned. You sure? It's a good chance. I already live where I want to be, she said firmly. She walked back to the porch, pressed the map into Gus's hand, and smiled. Turns out I don't need this. I'm already home. Summer brought warmth, and with it, people. A homesteader's child came, wanting to learn letters. Laya taught her, and soon more children came, carrying corn and eggs as payment. The cabin filled with the sound of chalk on slate, of young voices spelling their names for the first time. Gus built benches and a long table, his knife flashing in the sun. On a Sunday morning, the valley folk gathered. The women brought pies, the men a fiddle. Laya wore a dress she had stitched herself. Gus stood beside her, his beard trimmed neat. When they clasped hands, the preacher's voice was rough but kind. Speak your vows, he said. Laya's voice trembled, but her words rang true. I used to believe I was nothing, but this man gave me more than shelter. He gave me a place to stand, a name to carry, a life of my choosing. Gus cleared his throat, his voice breaking. I've built many things, cabins, corrals, coffins, but nothing was finished until her. Today I call her my wife, not because she's mine, but because she made this place a home. When Gus slid the carved wooden ring onto Laya's finger, the forest seemed to still, as if listening. That evening, the cabin glowed with lamplight. Laya set out writing lessons, while Gus carved shelves for their growing home. She had been told she was useless, a burden, a mouth to be sold. Now she was a wife, a teacher, a builder, more than she had ever dared to dream. She set down her pen, slid her hand across the carved letters of her name, and whispered, Home. And the word had never felt so true. If this story of a woman finding her own worth in the heart of the wilderness moved you, please hit that like button. And if you believe in the power of choice and the courage to build a new life, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep these incredible stories from the past alive.